All right, we're going to talk today about American house styles. And I'll just leave you unmuted, and if you have a question, you can shout it out. This is a graphic that shows all the different kinds of house styles, and some are variations on a theme. We're going to talk about the basic ones, and we'll see a lot of these on our walking tour on Wednesday. There's a great book called The Field Guide to American Houses if you want to better understand how to identify American houses and architecture. You can get that book from the library, purchase it. So that's a good book to have. And here's another one, American House Styles. There's also a tall, thin one, I don't have a picture of it, that has different housing styles. So well worth looking through. There's even a kid's coloring book that has housing styles that you could get and use that to study housing styles too. So the first one I want to talk about is Colonial Revival. And when we're on the walking tour, I'll ask you guys what style of house a particular house is. And I'm hoping that some of this sticks with you and people are able to remember the house style as we see it. So this is a Colonial Revival house. Typically, they're very symmetrical. And we'll see a couple examples in a minute. This one's a little off-center. So the door is slightly off-center, but the front door is the focal point. It often has a hip roof, and a hip roof means that it slopes in on all four sides. The windows are usually double-hung windows. So the sash goes up and down, often have divided lights in there. And it's a pretty simple house. Like this one, I know if I enter here, it's going to be my living room, dining room, bedroom, probably master bedroom here, because this one's a little off center. This is the center hallway upstairs. There's going to be a stairs as you go in. It's a classic house style that unfortunately is built all around the country because it doesn't address any of the climatic issues that we should be seeing in our architecture. But it's a traditional house style. People really like it. Bedrooms are all on the second floor. If you're familiar with the old show Leave It to Beaver from the 50s or 60s, this was the kind of house they lived in. It was what was popular. So here's an example of a Colonial Revival. This one's more typical because you've got this central entrance. Lots of times they'll have this little portico covering it. And we've got the perfectly symmetrical on both sides. So one side is the dining room, one side's the living room, kitchen's in the back. These are all bedrooms on the second floor. You know what you're getting into when you go into this house. Here's another one. Lots of times they'll have these are called pilasters. It's essentially looks like a column, but it's applied to the facade of the building. They'll often have this pediment over the door entry, and here's some columns holding up the pediment. You see the dormers on the second floor. And up here, there's often a detail called dental molding. It's because it looks like a bunch of little teeth. And you'll notice that they'll have this decorative cap on the windows. The previous one that we saw had a decorative band over the windows, and this is to support the brickwork coming down. But because it's brick, it looks a little bit different. But again, you see the dormers that they have here. So here's our Colonial Revival. Very typical, and you find it all throughout the country. Next one is Italianate. So Italianate houses are a little bit older. They're from the mid-1800s, and they can be wood, they can be brick. They're tall, they have tall, narrow windows, and often a pediment over the windows. They'll have a shallow hipped roof. Sometimes they'll have a cupola or tower. This hipped roof is very shallow sloped, and it's got a wide overhang. And one of the things that it has is it has decorative brackets supporting the overhang. And you see them right here, but we'll see them better on a picture. So the windows are all very similar in size and shape, and often tall and narrow. So here's an Italianate house. This one has shutters on it, and the windows have like a little arch to them, but very similar windows. So every single window on the first floor and the second floor are the same type of window. First floor is all the same, second floor is all the same. This has a big porch on the front, but can you see these brackets in here, up here? These are the decorative brackets. They don't really hold up the roof. They're made to look like they're holding up the roof, but they don't hold the roof up. This is another one, pink. It's kind of a bright, fun color. Again, here's our brackets. This has brackets in pairs holding up the roof, and all the windows are the same height, same width on the second floor, and same on the first floor. This has a different kind of porch on it. And even though it looks like a flat roof, this is actually a hipped roof. It's just very shallow, so you oftentimes don't see the roof shingles. Okay, our next style of architecture is called stick style. And stick style, it was very popular in the late 1800s, and it was a style that often didn't have an architect associated with it, but it was built by builders. And the other two house styles similar. They would often just be built houses. You could order plans. You still can order plans and build a stock house. So this one has decorative boards, like barge boards, applied to it. And it has all these textured wall surfaces or details on the wall surface. So this is just applied detailing. It's a very flat facade. And the roof can be gable. It could be cross gables. It could even be a hip, but usually gabled roof and more steep. I'll go to the next picture because it starts to make sense. So see all these decorative boards on here? These have no structural reason whatsoever. They're just for decoration, and there's pattern on the house in between these sections. Here's another one. So they would look, so these builders would go to these pattern books and they would order these decorative trims. They would order a little bullseye that's right here. They would order these little rondelles that are up here. And then they would put these flat boards on there just to create a pattern. And oftentimes you'll see something at the top of the gable end of the roof. Our next one is called Queen Anne. And the Queen Anne has nothing in common with the ones we've seen before. We're getting every kind of window you can imagine in here, all kinds of decorative elements, lots of bric-a-brac. So this window doesn't match this window. They don't. Sometimes they'll line up with the second floor, but they're not necessarily the same windows. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's very busy. There's usually a tower or a turret, and that's. If you see a turret, it's probably a Queen Anne. So when we go on the tour, when I ask you what a house is, if you see a turret, think Queen Anne. Often, this has both a hip roof and a gable roof, has a very elaborate front porch, and a lot of spindle work. The colors will be real bright. This is one where somebody probably used a pattern book and was buying everything that was in the book. So here you can see one. You can see all this detail up here, this decorative detail. This is just flourish. And there's a little cutaway corner, but see, here's one kind of window with art glass. Here's another kind of window. Here's a plain double hung window. Lots of times the porches are much bigger and more elaborate.
So Francis, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So when houses like this were built, were they really expensive because of how detailed and ornate they were?
Yeah, this wasn't for the average Joe. So they're bigger houses. There are small Queen Anne houses, but they tend to be bigger houses, and they were more elaborate, and they would have lots of woodwork and millwork on the inside. They tend to be really busy. The Victorian era was so the Industrial Revolution had happened a few years earlier, and they had machines that could make all of this fancy trim that used to have to be hand carved. And so the people who could afford it then would go and buy all this machine-made trim and this bric-a-brac. And so they're very busy, both inside and outside. And the furniture that they would put in, if you look at photographs of traditional Victorian or Queen Anne houses on the inside, there is so much stuff in there and so busy. So this is going to come into play when we talk about the prairie style architecture, because prairie style is going to react to this excess. So here's another one. This one's a little tamer, but you can see they a lot of decorative detailing on the porch, all different kinds of windows, and so I think the motto was more is barely enough. They would just literally purchase a ton of different decorative items and keep applying them to the space. Our next one is called shingle style architecture. Shingle style architecture was, again, the late 1800s, so we've got several different styles going on about the same period of time. And this was popular in East Coast vacation architecture. And what it has is, you'll see it a little bit better on the pictures, is the outside of the building is actually coated in shingles. That's where it gets its name. It has these huge, steep roofs. This one has a gambrel roof, which is like a barn roof, and it's got a gable roof at the back. So the use of natural material shingles as both the facade and on the roof. And it tends to be asymmetrical. And the Queen Anne was asymmetrical too. So here's a shingle style house. So it's using these natural shingles on the outside. So the roof and the wall are similar materials, and they're kind of low slung buildings. Even though this is really big, it's still a low slung building. And here's another shingle style. These were really popular on the East Coast as like weekend getaway houses, which I think most of them have been torn down. Okay, now we're going to talk about prairie architecture. So we saw several styles that were all happening around the same time, and then we have and during the late 1800s, there was a man in England named William Morris, and he developed the arts and crafts movement. And what he was doing is reacting against the architecture like this and all the bric-a-brac. So this was made possible because of machines. And when they had the machines that could do all this trim work, they went crazy and used too much of it. And so William Morris felt that we needed to get back to architecture that was handmade and had some human touch to it. So he had the arts and crafts movement, and was supposed to bring the worker back to the trades, and the crafts back to the trades. The problem was it was very expensive, so it wasn't affordable for most people. So prairie architecture came after the arts and crafts movement, but kind of had similar feelings. It is reacting against those excessive detailing on some of the other houses that we saw, and it is very simple. Now, the term prairie architecture didn't come about until Wright wrote his autobiography in the 1920s, but this was happening in the early 1900s, 1900 to 1920, very prevalent in the Chicago area, and we're going to see a lot of this in Oak Park. And they call themselves the Chicago architects, the group that worked here. So Wright coined the term prairie later. That's not what they called themselves when they were there. But they were trying to react to the environment that they were building in, so the prairie lands. So it's a low slung building, a low pitched hip roof. Usually 2 stories, oftentimes it could be just 1 story. Very symmetrical, minimal use of materials, really wide overhangs to protect the buildings, and then use of decorative glass or detailing on the windows. So here we've got the same window repeated over and over. And what they did was they grouped the windows together. They call it a ribbon of windows, so banding the windows together, as opposed to, I'm going to go back to our pink house again. As opposed to the pink house, each window is a punched opening in the Victorian houses. In the Italianate houses, each window is a punched opening. And in the colonial houses too, each window is a punched opening. So what the prairie houses are doing is they're grouping the windows together and they're making a band of them across. And then the detailing is very, these would have had beautiful, beautiful wood interiors, but not lots of, it would have been simple woodwork, not a lot of bric-a-brac or a lot of detailing. It would have been very simple interiors. Here's an arts and crafts house, the contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright's. This is the Purcell Cuts house in Minneapolis. Absolutely beautiful house. And notice all the windows are grouped together. So I've got this ribbon of windows here and up here. All the windows are the same. There's some art glass here. The Prairie architects loved art glass for a couple reasons. One was you didn't have curtains, because when I'm looking into that house, I can't see in at night because each pane of glass in the art glass refracts the light differently. So I don't have a clear view in. But when I'm inside, I can see out perfectly. It also provided beautiful decoration. And so the Prairie architects loved the leaded glass. Consequently, they ended up using a lot of casement windows, which are hinged on one side, because they could put the leaded glass into the casement window, harder with a double hung. So here the entrance is off to the side, not straight on at the front. It's asymmetrical. It's got a hip roof, which you can barely see right here. Up here it looks like it's flat, but that's actually a shallow hip roof. And they'll often have a big chimney and spaces focus around the chimney area. Okay, what house is this, guys?
It's the Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Yeah, it's the one you better know by the end of the semester.
Isn't it the Roby house?
It's the Roby house. It was in that film, which you all should have watched, because that film is going to come up on the midterm and the final. So make sure you watch it as it came up on the quiz. So this is the Roby house. It's in Hyde Park. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. He was not here for the construction because he'd left for Europe with May McChaney, left his wife and children. But this is very low slung. Notice minimal use of materials. We got brick, stone, and then the glass with the wood frame. And we're emphasizing that horizontal line, low pitched hip roof. And I think I showed you pictures of the interior of it. Beautiful art glass on the interior. So this is a very typical prairie house. And Wright was not the only one doing prairie houses. There were several people doing prairie houses. The next house we're going to talk about is a craftsman house. And I just have the little graphic. I don't have a picture of this. But the craftsman house, you see a lot of these in the Chicagoland area. I live in an arts and crafts or craftsman house. They're similar to the prairie houses, but probably not as expensive of a house. The prairie houses tended to be for wealthier people, not always though. And they're a little bit different. They'll often have a gable roof instead of the hip roof. They might have these square porch columns. They're actually really cute houses. It's also known as the bungalow style. It can be brick or it can be wood. Berwyn has gorgeous, gorgeous bungalows. Berwyn's like the bungalow capital of the world. I think more brick bungalows were built there per capita than any place else. So Berwyn's a great place to go look at unique bungalows, especially the ones that sit on the corners. They'll often group the windows together like they do in the prairie houses, but we're asymmetrical, and it's often a story and a half. Bungalows are not 2 stories. They're either a single story or a story and a half, which means you've got a center space on the second floor that you can use. There's a modernist house. These are from the 20s through the 40s, so this is Art Deco. This one has a rounded corner. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look at the shading, you know that this is a rounded corner. Very simple. They would often use steel framed windows on this, have a balcony, and here they were doing a flat roof. So when we get into the modern houses, they're doing a flat roof and smooth walls. So this was meant to reflect the machine age, and what was happening with machine age was airplanes and fast cars. And so a lot of these houses were very sleek. And then this last style that I have on here is called the International style. And that started in the 1920s. People consider it modernist. It's the roofs are flat. You're not seeing any coping or overhanging, so you're just seeing this flat top. The windows tend to be large and banked together like they are in the prairie houses. The windows are usually metal. There was an architect, Richard Meyer, who did a lot of houses in this style, and his were all white houses. We won't see the International or or this modernistic house on our walk on Wednesday because there weren't any built there. Although there is one house that has elements of this that was redesigned in the area that I'll point out. So here's a map of Oak Park. This is Roosevelt Road down here, Austin, North Avenue, and Harlem. So that's the boundaries for the village of Oak Park. And it's not a big town. There's about 60,000 people who live in Oak Park. I think it's 4 miles by a mile and 2.5 miles or something wide. But look at this. This is the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District, this red zone. So when in the 70s, there was a lot of white flight going on, and people were leaving communities because they were fearful. And Oak Park tried to stabilize its community, and they did it in a number of ways, and one of which was embracing their heritage of architecture. So they created the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District. So in this district, I think there's something like 15 or 20 Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in this district, plus contemporaries of Frank Lloyd Wright's. And they were able to work with realtors, and the community really consciously stopped the white flight. And so they protected this area. And the housing values stayed relatively stagnant as opposed to dropping. Maywood, on the other hand, wasn't able to do that. And Maywood was actually a wealthier town, and Austin area of Chicago was wealthier, but they had some issues with that time period in the 70s. So after they did this Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District, they then created 2 more historic districts. This is the Richland Historic District, this purple one, and there's a lot of historic houses. And being in the historic district doesn't mean that your house is designed by Frank Lloyd Wright or a famous architect. It means that it's a contributing structure, that it's been around long enough, and it helps to define the area of that community. The last one that was added, I think about 20 years ago, is the Gunderson Historic District, this green one here and a little block here. And this is, Gunderson was a developer, and it was 2 brothers, and they built all these houses that were similar in style. They're big 2-story, what's called American Foursquare, very similar in style in this area. So they bought up all this plot of land. They built these houses as spec houses. So they weren't designed for a specific client. They were built as spec houses and then sold. And then this little strip here. A friend of mine lives on this part right here, and I was sitting on her porch with her a couple weeks ago, and it was really idyllic because all of the porches and the front facades, every house had an open front porch, and they all perfectly lined up. So you could look down the whole block and see every front porch all the way to the corner. It was very interesting. I never sat on a porch where I had that feeling. Usually the houses are jogging in and out. So those are the 3 historic districts in Oak Park. And we will be going to the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District, and we will be going to just part of it. So this is Chicago Avenue, and this is Forest Avenue. Right here is Frank Lloyd Wright's house at the corner of Chicago and Forest, and that's where we will meet. I will send you an email with all that information, and we'll walk down this path, and then we're going to actually walk down here and then back up and around. So it's about an hour walking tour. What we will not go see is Unity Temple, which is right here on Lake Street, and I would encourage you to go do that on your own. This is These are the Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Oak Park in the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District. There's Unity Temple. And you can see there's quite a difference in the style. So we'll talk about how his style evolved as he was going through this. And we see 8 of these houses, plus some other houses along the way too. So it's a fun walk. It looks like we're going to have a beautiful, beautiful day for it. So I'm glad I postponed last week because it was kind of weather. So we'll have a great day for it.